Okay. So I just wanted to, talk to you a little bit about the art of storytelling, since it's been such a big part of your life, and since it's been in our family for such a long time as well. Um, so who was the there was uh, it's an overstatement to say famous orator, but well known for public speaking, was was it Etta's father? Who was it?
George Hale.
George Hale.
He was a Sunday school superintendent, and he was just a very good teller of tales, and he kept the family going with all of the things that had happened before, and he kept it all up.
Mm-hmm.
But there were lots of people in the family who were very good at telling stories. Um, Ada herself was a great storyteller.
Do you remember Etta telling you stories directly?
Oh yes, she would make up stories for me. Now, what was the one that was she did? She was just always it was some funny little thing that we said, and it wasn't funny little hairdo either. It was.
What was her style versus your mother's style? I mean, because your mother would make up stories as well, wouldn't she? Or was Etta more original?
Ada was more of the family historian. She would tell stories about things that had happened in the family. Whereas my mother worked in the library, and she told a lot of folk tales, and it was becoming quite a thing to do storytelling in public libraries.
When? What era is that? When would you say that phenomenon began?
That was in 1900.
So around
Around the turn of the century.
Is when storytelling in libraries
Yeah.
sort of took off.
Yeah, yeah. And it was
So like even a little bit before your mother was born. She's what, 1904?
1903.
1903.
And yeah. But she became very well known in Marion. She told
your mother.
My mother did. And kids loved to come to the library and listen to her tell stories. She would do this thing called made-to-order stories.
Right.
And each kid could go around the room and they could ask for something to be in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And she would manage to worm it all the way in. And if she left anything out, that kid who put it in would remind her, "You didn't put them in my thing."
So it's kind of, there's improv games like that are
Oh, sort of.
taking suggestions from the crowd.
Of course, they didn't use the word improv back then, but it was that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids really liked her storytelling.
And she was, had aspirations to be an actress.
She did.
And she met, her fairy godmother, Peggy Wilson, when she was at Northwestern.
Yes.
Had her go to a show to talk to the actress afterwards. And who was that?
Margaret Anglin.
Margaret Anglin, who was 49, I think, at the time.
Yes.
That they met. And they spoke after the performance. It was a funny story in the book that your mother wrote, and telling the story. There wasn't a ticket left for her at the box office, so your mother had to purchase a ticket, and then in the intermission they were screaming for Elizabeth Hamilton because the husband of the actress was supposed to get the ticket and failed, and then he got the ticket in the intermission.
She said, "Oh, Peggy's going to kill me."
Yes, Peggy's going to kill me.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but after that, that seems to be like a very significant conversation in your mother's life, in that seems to be the point where that conversation where it wasn't an acting profession wasn't seeming like it was all roses, and not only challenging, I think Peggy was very wise in insisting that your mother see the best theater in Chicago while she was matriculating at Northwestern to really offer a perspective that she might have been lacking in Marion.
Oh, yes.
But sort of the wisdom of your mother in pivoting in like, okay, I've got all of this interest in acting and channeling it into storytelling seemed to really be win-win for her.
It was. And she was beloved at the library. Boy, did they ever like her.
Now this is back at Marion.
And Marion.
She also did she do library work when she was in Chicago at all, or she just studied when she was there?
Let's see. I think she did a little bit.
I think because I thought Peggy was impressed with her initiative in getting a work while she was being supported by Peggy.
Yes. But it was quite an incredible story of her life that she just and the interest that she always had in theater transferred to working in a library, telling stories to the kids in the library.
And it's your mother, a very obviously renowned and accomplished novelist of young adult books. Her first novel, I think, was around 1952, 1953, somewhere in there. The Wabash Knows the Secret.
Yes.
But she had finished the manuscript, the first draft of the manuscript, around the time that you were born, if my timeline is correct, 41, 42, somewhere in there, because she was submitting short stories and getting rejected. And my take on it is, she's like, well, if I'm going to get rejected, why not get rejected for novels rather than just short stories? It's a bigger canvas.
Yeah.
And the idea of the history of the Wabash River was, like, sort of struck her. It seems like her writing style was like, what's the idea for the book, for my next book, or my first book? But once she got the initial genesis, it seemed like there was a lot of hard work, but not a lot of hemming and hawing or second guessing.
No.
Once she had the idea, she seemed to have the idea.
Yeah, she just ran with it.
Yes, and but there's a long time between the first draft and it getting that first book getting published by Doubleday. So there's a lot of storytelling, a lot of raising you, a lot of telling you stories. I mean, what do you remember? What can you inform about that period of time before her first novel was published?
Well, she was always trying to write, and I was certainly aware of how hard it was. But she was very hardworking, and she always had an idea for the next book that she was going to write. And then, of course, she was very lucky in that she got to know this woman who was an assistant editor at Doubleday.
Yeah, how did that come about?
That's quite a family story. So she was, I was in kindergarten, and I was going to go to a friend's dance recital, modern dance recital. And this woman's, she was an assistant editor at Doubleday, and she was very pleased to get to know my mother, and my mother was very excited to get to know her, because at that very moment, Doubleday had the manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
So they were working on getting that.
Oh, so
published.
it was already.
Well, draft number one was. She had to keep
in the slush pile. Or
yeah. So it was very exciting that this woman who she got to be my mother's best friend, and her daughter was my best friend, which is pretty unusual.
Yeah.
And to also have the interest in literature.
So when did she meet this assistant editor at Doubleday?
Well, I was in kindergarten.
In kindergarten, okay.
I was going to, kindergarten.
So about 5-6
school.
years after the first draft was finished?
No, she'd written it earlier. And she sent it out once and it was rejected.
Mm.
So you're going to read all that when you read
Yeah.
the book. And it was, she realized how hard it was. But Alice Pigeon kept encouraging her to work on this book, and she wrote 20 books of young adult novels, historical novels for young adults. And the first one was The Wabash Knows the Secret.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the Geneva Summer and Who's Your Heritage. She just really wrote about the Midwest. And they were very popular.
Mm-hmm.
I was working on a program in Holliston,
Mm-hmm.
and this woman invited me to come and come to her library and do something. And then she said, "Now this is what I really wanted to talk to you about. I didn't know that your mother was Elizabeth Hamilton Fryermuth. She was my favorite author."
Yeah.
So we were off then. It was a lot of fun.
So what, like, how would you sort of evaluate your mother, you know, with all of the storytelling experience you have now? Obviously, you didn't have that when she was reading to you as a child. Like, looking back at her storytelling, what are your thoughts on it? On her just pure storytelling, either
Well,
to you or to groups?
there was sort of a different era. We moved from one era to the next era where there was I was very involved in teaching storytelling. Oh, and then I started working in the library. She started at the Marion Public Library,
Mm-hmm.
and I was working at the Boston Public Library.
When? When was that job at the
This
Boston?
was right after I got out of college.
So 65-ish?
Yeah, 60, yeah, about then.
Okay, so you're out of college and you get a job at the
At the Boston Public Library.
But you got it because you mentioned that you were good at storytelling.
Yes.
But prior to that, I mean, what sort of amateur storytelling?
I'd done a lot of acting and amateur plays, and I'd done a lot of work in schools, and I just told a lot of stories. And
But I mean, any specifically reading to kids, like babysitting?
oh yes, I was always well, I'd done that, but that wasn't. I worked in the library, and well, right away I worked with this woman in South Boston Branch Library.
Mm-hmm.
Martha C. Engler was the storyteller and was the children's librarian. And she was very gifted, and she encouraged me a lot. We had a whole series of programs where we were learning storytelling. And she was a wonderful storyteller who could, she was German, Austrian actually, I think. And she had a terrible limp. But it didn't stop her at all. She'd had polio as a child. And she was just a wonderful storyteller. And it was great to work with her. And she just encouraged me a lot.
I mean, can you tell, you know, in all of the storytellers that you come across, like really early on and the first time you hear them, that like, wow, I mean, is it always instantly, wow, this person's really good? Do some people grow on you? Do sometimes you get the wrong impression, like, wow, they're much better than I thought they were when I first saw them? Or is it normally like the first the first read that you have when you see a storyteller is the most accurate
Well,
one.
it's something that you have to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And I, of course, was incredibly lucky because my mother had always been telling me stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a great background.
So it's something you need to develop. So you're talking about this woman encouraging you and sort of taking you under her wing as a storyteller. I mean, do you see similar situations in younger storytellers who are just starting out? You say, oh, wow, they don't have the experience, and then you see them years later, and you're like, whoa, they really
Yeah,
have
yeah,
got their craft down now.
yeah. There was I just was incredibly lucky to get to do all of this telling and to Martha C. Engler was just a wonderful person. And what I gradually discovered about her was that she always encouraged me, and she was never jealous. Because, you know, sometimes when a professional sees somebody up and coming who's really good, they can get a little bit.
Yeah.
But she was just so encouraging and so wonderful. So that was. I hope that as I talk about her, people will remember her because she was an incredible professional as a storyteller, and it was just a wonderful experience.
Mm-hmm. How is it like doing, I don't know, storytelling jam nights where it's a bunch of people telling stories, and it's obviously a mixed bag for what the crowds are going to be like at events like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you're doing that, like in comedy, oh, I hope I don't have to follow this person, or this person really steals the show. Is it similar in storytelling?
Well, it's not quite. It's you don't. I was one of the things where I was very lucky. Right at the very beginning, I was allowed um, to start telling these stories, and I jumped right in, and I just had some great fun, and people seemed to really enjoy them.
So the Boston Public Library, in what do you say, South Boston?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of your, official
Well,
beginning.
that was where I started, but they moved you around to a lot of different libraries. After I did South Boston, then I went over to Mattapan. So at these different libraries, there were special stories that I really latched onto. And in South Boston, there was a lot of Irish, so I did a lot of St. Patrick's Day stories. And we just really clicked with them. And then we moved to a different library. I was transferred to the Mattapan Branch Library. Now that branch was had a lot of Jewish families, so right away I thought, oh my goodness, I don't know any Hanukkah stories. So I went to the shelves of the Mattapan Branch Library, and there was this tiny little book called The Magic Top.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a perfect Hanukkah story.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And it was just great. And then I also got invited to tell stories at a conference in the spring down near the Cape.
So, when would that have been?
That would have been in 1965, I think.
So
66.
shortly after you're at the you got hired.
Yeah, after I got, well, no, first I was 2 years at the Boston Public Library, and Miss Engler was so generous. She never was, there was never any, oh, that she was this young upstart thing. And I do know at my wedding, um, the librarian at the South Boston Branch Library was invited to the wedding, and she said to my mother, she said, "May I speak with you?" And my mother got all worried. What is she going to say about it? And she said, as soon as Libby started, Miss Engler said that I had the best background in children's literature of anyone she had ever seen. So she started.
How did that make your mom feel? I mean,
great. Well,
your
yeah,
mom was worried.
she was the one who gave it to me.
Yeah.
So it was a very unusual and special experience. And now, of course, there are a lot more courses in storytelling. There were a lot at Simmons College of Library Science, and it's just, but people still just think it's not, don't appreciate it. Think anybody can tell a story. Well, not really. But of course, it was my background that really enabled me to do that.
Well, I look at storytelling, and there's a couple of different sort of categories of it. One would be you're in a library, you open a book, and you read the story, and you add your character and your performance to the text as written. And then, there's this long history before even the printed word of oral storytelling, and that by necessity is the text is constantly evolving as people change stuff and make it their own, or misremember what was, oh yeah, this character Theseus did fight the Minotaur. I forgot about that. I skipped over that. Whatever. And that's okay. It's not like it's not a deficit of the oral tradition of storytelling that it gets modified. It sort of evolves through time, and plenty of times gets improved upon. You know what? I don't like the way this is working. Let's add this, or make this more of a struggle, or whatever. And the elements of what makes a good story can constantly be reflected on and challenged and mixed up. So, like, what is sort of your experience in purely oral storytelling? Like, when you tell, when you're going to give an oral performance that doesn't necessarily have to be faithful word for word to a text.
No, they're not usually faithful, but they're just in the spirit of.
Well, I mean, you just sort of the classical sort of mind's eye definition of a librarian storyteller is someone who grabs a book off a shelf, opens it up, and reads it word for word.
Or holds it up.
Yes, and holds it up.
Pages, yes. There's that.
But I mean, you obviously went way farther than just doing that. So.
Well, the Boston Public Library did have just a great number of storytellers and classes in it, and it was really encouraged, and we did a darn good job. Oh, this is one of my favorite little stories. There's of course, in South Boston, they were all Catholic, and they would come in and they would say, "Who's going to say story hour today?" Like saying mass. I always thought that was pretty funny.
Right. So how long were you at the Boston Public Library?
I was there. I was in a number of branches. I was in South Boston, and I was in Mattapan, and I was in that There were a bunch of them. And then I moved to a different library, and then I went to the library where I switched over to the school library in Natick, and I was the head of the school libraries in Natick, Massachusetts, and we had 13 different schools.
So when was that? When did you officially start at the Natick school system?
I started in I think it was 2000
No.
something.
No.
No, it wasn't.
Not 2000.
I don't know.
Started in Natick. I knew you finished in 1999.
Right,
So it would have been the early 70s or late 60s?
something like that. But and I retired in
99.
99.
Right.
But one of the things that was really quite great that I did was I had a TV show.
And yes, Tales from Cricket Corner.
Yes.
And when did that start?
That started in, I don't remember. I'd have to look it up. We can insert this maybe. We can
Okay.
have a little printer thing. Maybe started there.
I would say late 70s. I mean, if I remember correctly, like 73, 74 is when I think you started at the Natick Library.
Yeah.
And Tales from Cricket Corner would have been late 70s through like 90.
Yeah, yeah. It was
probably, you think about 10 years it was on?
longer than that.
Long, 15?
Yeah, not that long. A very long time.
And how
Well-
many shows would you do? Like a season? Was it
I did,
once a week or
Once a month.
once a month?
Yeah. And, oh, here was the deal. I would, have kids invited to be the audience, and I would send the kids home with a letter that said, "Dear parents of future TV stars, your child has been invited to be an audience member for Tales from Cricket Corner," and they would come and they would listen, and they would, they enjoyed it a lot. It was fun.
So when you started at the Natick Public Library, you were 13 schools,
Mhm.
13 libraries, and you were going from school to school, and not only telling stories but sort of managing the library.
Oh, yes.
It was
I
just-
had 3 assistants, and then a lot of volunteers. So we had a really good program.
So how often, would you do storytelling during a week? Like every day, twice a day? Like how
a
many
lot
how many
of
classes?
times, a lot of times, because there were many schools to go to. I couldn't, and we all had a good time.
And with all of that, the 13 schools, which eventually got whittled down to 4. You said that your job was closing libraries
Yeah.
at one point, but you're telling stories constantly. You've got a team.
But I also had to select the books. I was reading review magazines and picking up the books that would go to the 13 schools, whittled down to 4.
Right.
And it was a very fascinating job.
Like in terms of your storytelling skill, it's probably invisible to you in doing so much storytelling because you're so like in the moment of exactly how much better you're getting as you're progressing, because you don't really see it because you're doing it all the time. Where someone who, wow, I haven't seen you tell stories for a year, you've upped your game.
Well, I did a lot of different programs, I think that the TV show was quite extraordinary. A lot of people did storytelling on TV, but I did, the fact that I had a specific name for my show,
Mm-hmm.
and the kids got to be.
not just story time with Libby Franck, tales from Cricket
And
Corner.
sometimes I would have a lot of guests that would come and tell stories.
But you'd also bring guests to schools, storytellers.
Yes.
And some big names in children's literature.
Yes, I had J. O'Callahan came a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And but there's also a lot where you have to you tell stories from other books that people have books of storytelling. So it's not just folk tales. And it was I think the kids had a really good time in Natick.
Well, sure. I mean, our family would go out to the movies, and people would always come up to you and say, "You used to tell me stories in school."
Mm-hmm.
Whether they were in high school
or on
out
TV.
of high school.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
it was a constant sort of storytelling paparazzi. So after the TV show is over, after you retired from the Natick school system, you still continued to tell stories. It's not like that, certainly not That's All, folks. To talk about that. Well, I mean, prior to that, beyond the Natick school system, professional storytelling, there's obviously tons and tons of research that are going on outside of your job.
Oh yeah. Well, of course, there was the reading of the reviews to select the books, but there was also a lot of stories that were written, but you always had to be careful of copyrights. So if I were to pick out two different stories that I really enjoyed, one was The Wild Woman of the Woods, which was a story of Northwest Coast Indians. And that was a lot of fun. But that was one that, where the kids, there was a little girl that got so scared the kids expect a scary story. Sure. They're all chanting, scary story,
So what was the story?
What was this one, The Wild Woman of the Woods, which was this Native American story from the Northwest Coast. And this little girl was very scared. And I've never had this happen before. And she was almost crying. And, so I toned it down. And it got less and less scary. But then I started to, well, of course I have to finish it. They'll hate me forever if I don't finish the story. So I said, let's all help this little girl be very brave to listen to this story. So let's help her. Sometimes you just have to make these things up as they come to you. But and then another story that I really liked, which was a literary story, which was Elsie Pittock Skips in Her Sleep. Oh my goodness, it was by Eleanor Fauchon. It was a beautiful story.
Oh yeah, I remember you telling that.
Yeah. So it's quite an art form, and it's a lot of fun.
So what was the research that you did at the Mythology Institute?
Oh, yes. Well, there were a couple of events that I got to go to. I had to apply to them. One was the Mythology Institute, which was in Ohio, that college that your friend...
Miami of Ohio.
Miami of Ohio, yes. So I had to apply for it. They took 30 storytellers. And it was, what did I do? Well, it was all mythology, and I had to figure out how to tell myths. And
did you get a lot out of that?
Oh yes, we got it was a free trip out there.
But I mean, did you get a lot out of the
Oh
curriculum?
yes, we had a number of wonderful um, professors that discussed things with us. It was a great time. It was really wonderful. So
And then wasn't there at Yale the
oh yes,
Arthur?
that was about King Arthur.
Yes.
And it was a wild time. Sometimes I tell it in story form, and I call it King Arthur Goes to Yale. It was um, so it was just a wonderful career, which is not over.
Hmm.
I still can.
You're still working on stuff now. What did you enjoy more? Because you tell plenty of stories to adult audiences.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just juvenile, kids in libraries and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you compare telling stories for kids versus telling stories to, older than kids?
They they both really enjoy them.
Is there one that you enjoy more?
I'd say it more depends on the story.
Hmm.
Then, I mean, some audiences are wonderful and some are.
Any memorable hell gigs of bad context? Because everyone has like stories of the road of gigs that were no fun or a disaster.
Oh yeah, there were. I try very hard to forget those.
But sometimes they're funny stories.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there you go. You get a good story out of it.
You do.